The rain-soaked cemetery had fallen into a heavy hush when a trembling young voice sliced through the grief. "Your daughter is alive." All eyes turned toward a small, hooded girl, standing at the edge of the mourners. Billionaire businessman Jonathan Whitmore froze mid-step, his gaze snapping from the mahogany casket to the girl's unwavering stare. For weeks, he had been drowning in sorrow, convinced that his beloved child, Lily, had perished in the house fire. Yet here was a stranger claiming otherwise. The girl, who later introduced herself, as Claire stepped forward despite the guard's hesitation. She spoke with a certainty that rattled everyone present. Lily had not died that night, she had been taken. Claire described a man with a heavy limp, dragging the frightened child out the back, before flames reached the fardo. Second floor, and standing beside him, was none other than Jonathan's glamorous fiancée, Evelyn. Murmurs spread through the crowd like wildfire. Evelyn's face stiffened, her polished composure cracking just enough for Jonathan to see. Claire's words struck a raw nerve, stirring a dangerous hope in Jonathan's chest. For the first time since the tragedy, doubt gnawed at the version of events he'd been told. The coffin was inches from being lowered into the ground when Jonathan's voice rang out. Stop. The burial was halted, the casket secured. And a new truth began to claw its way into the light. One that could shatter reputations, expose betrayal, and ignite a search that would change all their lives forever. The moment Jonathan Whitmore stopped the burial, the atmosphere around the cemetery shifted, from mournful ceremony to something taut and electric. The crowd dispersed in uneasy clusters, some whispering in disbelief, others casting suspicious glances toward Evelyn. Claire remained close to Jonathan, her damp sneakers sinking slightly into the soft ground, her hands clenched as though she was holding on to more than just courage. Inside the quiet of Jonathan's private garage, the air smelled faintly of cedar and engine oil. Claire reached into the pocket of her oversized hoodie and withdrew a small, frayed shoelace bracelet. Its pink cord was scorched along one edge, wrapped around a plastic button, decorated with tiny cartoon stars. She dropped this in the back seat, Claire said softly. Her wrists were tied, but she was trying to leave something behind. Jonathan took it carefully, as though afraid it would dissolve in his palm. Recognition struck hard. The bracelet was one he and Lily had made together during a summer trip to their lake cabin. She had cried when it slipped off once during a hike, and he'd promised to keep it safe. From that day on, she'd worn it every single day. He turned the button over, and there they were. Her initials, written in black marker. Evelyn, hovering near the door, scoffed. She could have stolen that from the house. Jonathan's voice was cold. Claire's never been inside my house. He slipped the bracelet into his pocket as a weighty piece of evidence, then crossed to a sleek black SUV parked in the far corner, the same car Evelyn had driven on the night of the fire. I told you, the dashcam was broken, Evelyn said sharply. He didn't answer. Instead, he crouched in the passenger side, found the concealed latch beneath the dashboard, and retrieved the small dashcam unit. It was still warm from the faint current that had been running through it, contrary to her story about disabling it weeks ago. He said nothing, but the set of his jaw was answer enough. Minutes later, they were in his study, the memory card loaded into his monitor. Claire stood a few feet behind him, her breath shallow. The footage began with the SUV parked on a quiet street across from the burning house. The camera's view flickered, then steadied. 20 minutes passed in silence before a shadow emerged, a tall, broad-shouldered man dragging a struggling child. His limp was pronounced, each step uneven and heavy. Jonathan's pulse roared in his ears as Evelyn appeared on the screen. She opened the rear passenger door without hesitation. The man shoved Lily inside, and Evelyn's lips curved into something that was not quite a smile, but close enough to make Jonathan's stomach churn. The screen went black, abruptly cut mid-scene. Someone had deliberately trimmed the file. Claire's voice trembled. You believe me now? Jonathan didn't look at her. His eyes were still fixed on the blank monitor, rage building under his grief. I know who I don't trust, he said hoarsely. That night, he called in Elijah Cross, a discreet tech specialist he had worked with on a sensitive corporate case years earlier. Elijah arrived before dawn, his silver hatchback packed with equipment. Within an hour, he had the hard drives deleted, data restored. When the footage resumed, Jonathan saw the continuation of what had been cut. Inside the car, Evelyn sat in the driver's seat, speaking in low tones to the limping man later identified as Marcus Hale, a former private contractor with a shadowy record. From the back seat came a muffled cry. Evelyn's voice, sharp and impatient, ordered, "Keep her quiet." The image froze on her face, cold and calculated. Jonathan leaned back in his chair, breath shallow. "Get me everything on him," he told Elijah. Elijah handed him a printed photo. Marcus Hale. Served overseas. Injury gave him that limp. Disappeared from official records 3 years ago. He's been seen in the rural outskirts of Des Moines, Maryland. And the SUV? Registered to a shell company Evelyn is tied to. Jonathan stood, the bracelet warm from where his palm had been pressing it tight. He thought of the bead and crayon that Claire had found wedged between the SUV's seats earlier, small tokens Lily must have dropped deliberately, hoping someone would notice. These weren't just forgotten items. They were her message. Her plea. Claire, seated quietly near the doorway, watched him. Her expression was a mixture of defiance and vulnerability, as though she wasn't sure if he'd still want her around once Lily was found. Jonathan crossed the room and crouched to meet her eyes. "You've done more than anyone else," he said. "You saved her already by speaking up." Claire's chin wobbled slightly. "I didn't do it for thanks. I did it because I know what it's like when no one believes you." He nodded, understanding more than he cared to admit. Then he looked at Elijah. "Find where they're keeping her. I don't care what it takes." Over the next hours, the room transformed into an impromptu war room. Maps spread across the table, photographs pinned to corkboards, digital files glowing on the monitors. The bracelet lay in the center, like a compass pointing toward the truth. Every clue tightened the circle: Marcus Hale's last known vehicle sighting, Evelyn's transactions through offshore accounts, the route of a black SUV, the night of the fire. Together, they formed a trail. Jonathan's grief no longer dulled his senses, it sharpened them. And with every bead, crayon, and pixel of recovered footage, he felt the ache in his chest turn into something far more dangerous: determination. Somewhere, Lily was alive. And now he had proof, a suspect, and the will to see it through. No matter how far he had to go, or how many lies he had to break apart to bring her home. Jonathan Whitmore had spent nights chasing leads, piecing together scraps of information that felt maddeningly incomplete. But when Elijah Cross pinpointed a string of sightings matching Marcus Hale's limp, the trail suddenly sharpened. A rural stretch of Maryland farmland, isolated, ringed by dense woods, appeared in 3 separate reports. The property, on paper, belonged to an agricultural supply company. Elijah's voice was grim as he spread the satellite images across the desk. "It's a front. No crops, no livestock, just storage barns. And look, here fenced areas that don't make sense, unless they're for keeping people in." Jonathan felt the bracelet in his pocket, the frayed shoelace warm from his clenched fist. Every bead of sweat, every breath tonight would be for Lily. They left before sunset, driving in silence, the hum of the engine underlining the urgency in their veins. Claire insisted on coming, but Jonathan made her stay behind under protection. "If this goes wrong," he told her, "I can't risk you too." She didn't argue, just pressed the bracelet back into his palm as though to remind him what was at stake. By the time they reached the property, night had settled in like a thick shroud. The gravel driveway curved into shadow, disappearing between 2 derelict barns. No lights showed in the farmhouse, but Elijah's infrared scanner revealed heat signatures inside too many for a simple home. 4 in the east barn, Elijah whispered, eyes on his tablet. 2 moving around, 2 smaller. Jonathan's pulse kicked. That's her. They moved fast, avoiding the main path, circling through tall grass wet with dew. The barn loomed ahead, its corrugated metal walls rusted and scarred. Through a gap in the boards, Jonathan saw the faint glow of a hanging bulb and the outline of a man slouched in a chair, rifle across his lap. Marcus Hale. The limp was visible even in his seated posture, one knee bent awkwardly. Elijah slid a suppressed pistol from his holster. "We can take him quiet." Jonathan shook his head. "I'll distract. You get the kids out." It happened in seconds, Jonathan stepping into the doorway, voice cold and cutting. Marcus jerked upright, rifle lifting, but Jonathan was faster. The 2 men crashed into the dirt floor, the weapon skidding away. Elijah slipped past, heading to the far corner where 2 small figures huddled together. One of them lifted her head, hair tangled, cheeks streaked with dirt. Lily. The relief that punched through Jonathan was almost enough to knock him off balance, but he held Marcus down until Elijah's voice cut through the tension. Got them. Lily's arms wrapped around her father's neck like she'd never let go. Jonathan murmured into her hair, promising over and over that she was safe now. The other child, a boy no older than 8, clung to Elijah, wide-eyed and silent. They moved quickly, piling into the SUV they'd left concealed behind a hedgerow. But as they pulled away, Elijah's voice was tight. There's more, Jonathan. That boy says there are. Other kids move through here every few weeks. Different farms. Different states. The words settled like lead in Jonathan's chest. This wasn't just about Lily anymore. This was bigger, darker, a network that had to be torn apart before it swallowed anyone else's child. By dawn, they were back in the city, Lily asleep against Jonathan's side in the rear seat. Elijah was on the phone with federal contacts, outlining everything they had. Marcus's involvement, Evelyn's link to the property, the dashcam footage, the boy's testimony. Within hours, raids were planned across 3 states. News trickled in through the day barns and warehouses emptied of children, arrests made, documents seized. The scale was staggering. Evelyn wasn't just complicit. She'd been a broker, arranging transfers through a web of fake companies. Marcus was one of several enforcers. Jonathan stayed by Lily's side through it all, his hand resting lightly on hers. He listened as she described how Claire had whispered to her through a fence the night of the fire, telling her to leave clues, beads, crayons, anything that might help her father find her. She said you'd look for me, Lily murmured, eyes heavy with sleep. Jonathan's throat tightened. I'll always look for you. When evening fell, Elijah returned from a debrief with agents, his expression carved from stone. We got most of them. But some are still out there. Jonathan looked at his daughter, safe and breathing, then back at Elijah. Then we're not done. Because saving Lily had pulled him into a fight far larger than his own grief. And now that he'd seen what was hidden behind the quiet facades of those barns and farms, he knew he couldn't walk away, not while other parents were still burying empty coffins, never knowing the truth. The days after Lily's rescue felt almost unreal inside the Whitmore estate. The once silent halls now echoed with the sound of her laughter, hesitant at first, then fuller, freer, as she relearned what it meant to feel safe. Jonathan rarely let her out of sight, but he noticed something else in those moments of joy. Claire was always nearby, watching from a quiet corner, as if making sure her mission to protect Lily wasn't over just because the danger had passed. One evening, after dinner, Jonathan found Claire sitting on the back steps that overlooked the sprawling garden. She was picking at the frayed hem of her sweater, gaze fixed on the darkening sky. He joined her, handing over a mug of hot cocoa. You could stay here, he said. Gently. Not just tonight. As long as you want. Her brow furrowed. I don't belong in a place like this. Jonathan's voice was firm but kind. You belong where you're valued. And after what you did for Lily, that's here. It was the first time he saw her look startled, not by fear, but by the unfamiliar weight of being wanted. She sipped the cocoa in silence before speaking again, her voice low. I've been on my own since I was 10. Foster homes didn't work out. I learned to sleep light, keep moving. Trust no one. She hesitated, then added. I had a sister once. Jasmine. We were separated when I got placed in a group home. I lost track of her years ago. Jonathan listened without interrupting. The way she said Jasmine's name soft, careful, was the same way he spoke of Lily when she was missing. He understood that kind of ache. Over the next days, he noticed how Claire began to loosen her guard, bit by bit. She helped Lily plant flowers in the greenhouse, taught her how to braid bracelets out of colored twine, and even joined in on board games in the library. Lily clung to her like a big sister, their bond forming so naturally it felt as if it had always been there. Jonathan made a quiet decision. Claire would not return to the streets. She would have her own room here, her own bed, and, if she wanted, a chance to find the one person she'd lost. One rainy afternoon, while Lily napped, Jonathan found Claire in the kitchen flipping through a photo album Lily had left on the counter. Do you ever think you'll find her? He asked. Claire closed the album slowly. Sometimes I think she's gone for good. Other times, I dream about running into her somewhere. And in the dream, she remembers me. Jonathan leaned against the counter. Dreams have a way of pointing us toward what matters. If you want, I can help you look. She blinked, caught between hope and disbelief. You'd do that? "I've seen what happens when people are taken from the ones they love," he said. "I won't let that happen twice in the same house." For the first time, Claire smiled, a small, cautious curve of her lips, but genuine. It was the kind of smile that suggested she was beginning to believe him. From then on, she became more than the girl who had saved Lily. She was part of their strange, healing family. Jonathan found himself looking forward to the sound of 2 sets of footsteps running through the halls, to the sight of Claire teaching Lily how to whistle, to the quiet moments when she'd sit with him and ask questions about things she'd never had the chance to learn. What Claire didn't realize was that Jonathan had already set things in motion: contacts, searching through foster care records, missing person reports, and anything that might lead to Jasmine. He didn't tell her yet. He wanted to be certain before he brought hope back into her life. Because for Jonathan, keeping Claire safe wasn't repayment, it was a choice. She had brought his daughter home. Now it was his turn to bring her family back to her. It was nearly 3 weeks after Lily's rescue when Jonathan Whitmore called Claire into his study. The late afternoon light slanted through the tall windows, casting warm gold over the stacks of papers and photographs spread across his desk. Claire stepped in cautiously, eyes flicking to the manila folder in his hand. "I have something for you," Jonathan said, his tone carrying both weight and anticipation. He opened the folder, revealing a photo slightly grainy, taken outside a small community center in Delaware. A girl about Claire's age, with the same sharp brown eyes and stubborn tilt of the round chin, was laughing with a group of younger kids. Claire froze. "That's Jasmine." Her voice was barely a whisper, as though speaking the city name might break the fragile moment. Jonathan's investigator, Daniel Reyes, stepped forward. "We tracked her through old foster care records. She aged out last year, but she's been volunteering at youth shelters ever since. Lives in a shared apartment not far from here." Claire's hands trembled. She'd imagined this moment 1,000 times in the years they'd been apart, sometimes with bitterness, sometimes with aching hope. Now it was real, and her knees felt unsteady. Can we go to her?" Jonathan smiled faintly. "We already have an appointment. Tonight." The drive felt endless, even though it was barely an hour. Claire sat in the back with Lily, twisting the frayed bracelet around her wrist. Lily reached over and squeezed her hand. "She's going to be so happy to see you." When they arrived, Reyes led them down a narrow hallway that smelled faintly of fresh paint and coffee. At the end was a modest common room, its walls lined with mismatched couches. A young woman was kneeling by a coffee table, sorting books into piles. She looked up when the door opened, and for a heartbeat, her face went blank. Then her eyes widened, filling with recognition and something deeper, heavier. "Claire." The word cracked something open in both of them. Claire crossed the room in 2 strides, and then they were in each other's arms, holding on as though afraid the other might vanish. Jasmine's shoulders shook with silent sobs, and Claire's tears dampened the fabric of her sister's sweater. "I thought I lost you forever," Jasmine said into her hair. "I thought the same," Claire whispered back. "But I found people who helped me, and I couldn't stop until I found you." Lily stood a few steps away, watching the reunion with wide eyes until Jonathan nudged her gently forward. "This is Lily," Claire said, turning to pull her into the embrace. "She's like our little sister now." Jasmine smiled through her tears, cupping Lily's face. "Then I guess I have 2 sisters to look after." They spent the rest of the evening at a small diner around the corner, the kind with chipped mugs and checkered tablecloths. Jasmine told stories of the places she'd stayed, the kids she'd helped, and the way she'd always carried a scrap of paper with Claire's name on it, just in case someone knew where she was. Claire, in turn, recounted the night of the fire, her decision to speak up, and the strange twist of fate that had brought Jonathan and Lily into her life. By the time they returned to the estate, the 3 girls were walking arm in arm, their laughter mingling in the cool night air. Jonathan watched them from a few steps back, a quiet satisfaction settling in his chest. What had started as a desperate search for his daughter had expanded into something bigger. A family that had been broken and rebuilt, stronger for the pieces it had gained along the way. That night, the guest room next to Claire's was prepared for Jasmine. The sisters stayed up late, whispering like they had when they were children, while Lily drifted to sleep in the room across the hall. For the first time in years, none of them felt alone. Jonathan knew there were still battles ahead, shadows from the past that might resurface. But, for now, in the glow of the restored family he saw before him, there was peace, and the certainty that, whatever came next, they would face it together. The arrest came quietly but decisively. At dawn, a convoy of unmarked SUVs rolled up to the gated property where Evelyn Hart had been hiding since the truth began to close in. Federal agents moved in with calculated precision, no shouting, no spectacle, just the cold, efficient snap of handcuffs locking around her wrists. Jonathan Whitmore stood a short distance away, his hands in his coat pockets, watching without expression as she was led past him. Their eyes met for only a second. Hers were defiant, but there was a flicker of something else. Recognition that the game was over. The trial began 3 months later in a high-security courthouse. Prosecutors presented a damning chain of evidence. The dashcam footage showing Evelyn aiding Marcus Hale, financial records tying her to shell companies used for trafficking payments, and testimony from survivors who had passed through the same network. Claire's account of the night of the comms fire, along with Lily's own words, formed an unshakable narrative. Evelyn's defense team tried to paint her as a pawn, manipulated by dangerous men, but the jury saw through it. When the verdict was read guilty on all counts, Jonathan exhaled for what felt like the first time in months. Evelyn was sentenced to life without parole, her empire of lies dismantled in full view of the public. Meanwhile, Marcus Hale, exposed under his real name, Carter Briggs, was also taken into custody. Facing a mountain of charges, he made a calculated choice: cooperation. In exchange for a reduced sentence, he provided detailed information about the trafficking network, naming overseas operatives, revealing hidden transport routes, and pointing to offshore accounts funding the operation. His testimony blew the case open. What had begun as a local investigation spread across borders, triggering coordinated raids in multiple countries, warehouses in Eastern Europe, coastal villas in the Caribbean, and shipping containers in Asian ports, all linked to the same sprawling enterprise, were uncovered and seized. Dozens of children were freed in the process, their stories echoing the same patterns of deception and exploitation. For Jonathan, the legal victories were a relief, but they didn't erase the scars. Sitting in the quiet of his study after the sentencing, he knew that justice was not just about locking people away, it was about ensuring the network could never rebuild. That resolve shaped the weeks that followed, as he poured resources into supporting international agencies, still tracking fugitives tied to the ring. One evening, Lily curled up beside him, her head resting on his arm. "Does this mean they can't hurt anyone else?" she asked. Jonathan glanced toward the hallway, where Claire and Jasmine were laughing together in the wars kitchen. "Not as long as we keep fighting," he said. The fight had started as a father's desperate search for his child. Now, it had become something larger, a mission to close every door that predators like Evelyn and Carter had once slipped through, and to keep them sealed, for good. Spring arrived with a quiet warmth, and for the first time in a long while, Jonathan Whitmore felt that his home was not just a place of safety, it was a place of beginnings. The ordeal of Lily's rescue and the battles in court had left their mark, but they had also sparked something new. It began as a conversation over breakfast one morning, when Lily, Claire, and Jasmine were huddled together at the kitchen table, sketching ideas on scrap paper. "We should make a place for kids like us," Claire had said, her pencil tracing the outline of a garden. "Somewhere safe. Somewhere they can grow." Jonathan leaned over to see the page. It was a rough drawing, but the vision was clear: rows of plants, an open kitchen, an art corner, and a sign that read "Just Roots." Within weeks, the idea became a plan. Jonathan used part of his estate's unused land acres of overgrown fields behind the main gardens as the foundation. He reached out to architects, landscapers, and child advocates. Claire insisted on helping with the design, Jasmine offered to coordinate with local shelters, and Lily suggested they hold weekend classes so other kids could learn things she wished she'd known before. The official launch of the Just Roots Foundation was a community event unlike any the town had seen. Volunteers, neighbors, and children from nearby shelters gathered to plant the first seeds. Jonathan watched as Lily knelt in the soil beside a younger boy, showing him how to pat down the earth gently. Claire organized a painting station, where long wooden panels became a mural of bright flowers and hopeful faces. Jasmine set up a small outdoor kitchen, teaching simple recipes with vegetables they would grow themselves. But Just Roots was more than just a garden, it was a living classroom. Each week, children came to learn not only how to plant and cook, but also about their rights, self-protection, and The importance of community. Local artists volunteered to run drawing and sculpture workshops. Retired chefs taught cooking classes. Social workers held small group talks under the shade of old oak trees, answering questions the children were often too afraid to ask anywhere else. Jonathan made it a point to be present for as many sessions as possible. He wasn't just funding the project, he was part of it. Sometimes he helped dig irrigation trenches, other times he read stories to a circle of children at the end of the day. And always, he made sure that 3 girls who had become his family, Lily, Claire, and Jasmine, were at the heart of it all. Word of the foundation spread quickly. Donations poured in, and soon Just Roots expanded to include a small greenhouse, a library corner stocked with donated books, and a creation shed filled with tools for crafts and woodworking. On Saturdays, the garden buzzed with life, children laughing, adults chatting over coffee, the scent of fresh bread wafting from the outdoor oven. For many of the kids who came, it wasn't just about learning a skill, it was about feeling seen. One afternoon, Jonathan overheard a little girl tell Claire, "This is the first place I've ever felt like I belonged." Claire's smile was quiet but full, the kind that told Jonathan this was exactly why they'd built it. The foundation's motto, planting hope, growing futures, wasn't just printed on the sign at the entrance. It was lived out every day in the soil, the laughter, and the shared meals. And as the seasons passed, the once empty fields transformed into a lush, vibrant space, each bloom and harvest a testament to resilience. Jonathan often thought about how the darkest chapter of their lives had given birth to this. Just Roots was proof that even from the deepest wounds, something strong and beautiful could grow, and that love, when planted, had a way of spreading far beyond the place where it first took root. By the end of summer, the Whitmore estate no longer felt like the quiet, guarded fortress it had once been. Laughter spilled from the garden in the afternoons, the kitchen smelled of warm bread and herbs, and the orchard behind the house, once overgrown and neglected, was alive with color. The apple trees, pruned and cared for by dozens of small, eager hands, hung heavy with fruit. For Jonathan, every branch felt like a victory, a sign that the life they had rebuilt was taking root not just for his family, but for everyone touched by Just Roots. The orchard became the heart of their gatherings. On crisp autumn mornings, children from the community came to help pick apples, filling baskets that would later be used in pies, cider, and jams. Claire ran the Tree Stories corner, where she told tales of each apple variety as if they were characters in a grand adventure. Jasmine organized cooking lessons under the open sky, showing the younger kids how to turn fruit into something sweet to share at home. Lily, with her boundless energy, darted between the groups, carrying supplies and making sure no one was left without a partner. But it wasn't just the orchard. Every month, the family hosted new events: tree planting, drives in nearby parks, art classes in the greenhouse, and weekend workshops on everything from composting to mural painting. These weren't just lessons in gardening or creativity, they were lessons in community. Jonathan watched children who had once arrived quiet and withdrawn begin to speak up, form friendships, and take pride in their work. Parents, too, began to linger, helping with planting or simply sharing stories over mugs of cider. The most anticipated event of the year, though, was the Lantern Festival. Inspired by Lily's idea, it was meant to be a night of hope, one where every lantern released into the sky carried a wish, a memory, or a silent prayer. In the days leading up to it, the orchard shed became a lantern workshop. Paper in every color filled the tables, along with paint, ribbons, and small slips of parchment for messages. On the evening of the festival, the orchard glowed under strings of warm lights. Neighbors, volunteers, and children from shelters arrived with their lanterns in hand. Jonathan stood near the entrance, greeting each guest, while the girls moved among the crowd, helping the youngest tie their ribbons and write their wishes. When night fully settled, the air was filled with the soft rustle of paper and the murmurs of anticipation. Jonathan stepped forward to speak, his voice carrying over the crowd. "Tonight, we send light into the sky, not to forget the past, but to honor it. Every challenge we faced, every loss, every act of kindness. They've all brought us here. And here, we choose hope." One by one, the lanterns rose, bobbing gently before catching the breeze. Soon the sky was a constellation of glowing orbs drifting higher, their light reflected in the faces below. Jonathan glanced at Claire and Jasmine, standing shoulder to shoulder, each holding Lily's hand. In their eyes, he saw something unspoken. They weren't just surviving anymore, they were building. The next morning, the orchard was quiet again, save for the sound of early birds and the soft crunch of footsteps on grass. Jonathan walked among the trees, stopping to check the small saplings they'd planted in spring. These young trees would take years to bear fruit, but that was the point. What they were doing here was meant to last. In the months that followed, the orchard and Just Roots became more than community projects, they became symbols. Local newspapers ran stories about how the once private Whitmore estate had opened its gates, turning tragedy into a living example of what healing looked like. Donations and volunteers arrived from outside the state, bringing not just money, but ideas: beekeeping workshops, literacy programs, even a traveling puppet theater for their own children. Jonathan often thought about how unlikely this life would have seemed a year ago. Back then, his world had been small and dark, centered on loss. Now, it stretched outward in every direction, tied together by the bonds of a family he never expected to have and a community that had grown around them. Every festival, every tree planted, every child who left Just Roots with dirt on their hands and a smile on their face was proof of what they'd built. The orchard's branches reached higher each season, and with them, so did the hope of everyone who walked beneath their shade. In that quiet, abundant space, Jonathan understood something simple: healing was not a destination. It was a garden. And as long as they kept tending it, there would always be room for more light. The journey of Jonathan, Lily, Claire, and Jasmine is more than a story of survival. It's a testament to the power of speaking out for the truth, even when the odds are terrifyingly high. It shows us that family isn't just defined by blood, but by the bonds we choose to protect and nurture. Through loss, betrayal, and danger, they discovered that justice is not solely about crossing, punishing the guilty. It's about rebuilding lives, creating safety where there was fear, and planting hope where there was none. Their home became a sanctuary, and their work through Just Roots became a living promise that no voice would be silenced, no child forgotten. In our own lives, we may not face the same dangers, but we all encounter moments when staying silent feels easier than speaking up. Yet, real change begins the moment we dare to stand for what's right, to protect the vulnerable, and to open our hearts to those who need us. Family can be the people we're born to, or the people we fight for. And justice, at its truest, is when love and compassion restore what cruelty tried to destroy. If this story touched you, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us about a time you stood up for what was right. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss more stories that inspire hope, courage, and change.